Hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 190. So glad you could join me. Sorry for the late start. I was trying to get Twitter running, and I think Twitter is now a subscription service overnight and won't allow it. So I think we might not stream on Twitter anymore. But we are live on Facebook and YouTube. As I should say, Rattle's a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do this because we love poetry, and I know you do too, so please do click the like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications. Anything you can do to help spread poetry around the internet would be greatly appreciated. As always, we're going to start with our Poets Respond poet, but today's guest is Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach, and she'll be here in about 10 minutes. But let's talk to Elizabeth McMunn-Tetangco right now. She had Sunday's poem back several days ago about serious people. Hey, Elizabeth, how you doing?
Hi, I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I'm so glad you could be here. So to start out, tell us a little bit about what the what inspired the poem, because I don't watch this show, and I have to even look at again what the show is called, Succession. I know nothing about this. It was just a really cool poem. So tell us what Succession is and what inspired the poem.
So basically, Succession is this show that's on HBO, and it's about this family that I think is loosely based on the Murdochs, although I'm not completely sure about that. But they run a bunch of media corporations. And so the whole premise of the show is that they're trying to figure out who's going to succeed the father who is getting, older and who had founded the company. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of a dark comedy. And yeah, my husband and I have been rewatching it, and the new season's out. And so we've been watching that too.
Well, when I Googled, it was like a whole bunch of like spoilers. So I thought like I better not read about this because in case I want to watch the show, it was like oh my God, this happened this week. But there was a line in particular that stood out to you. And so what was that line, and how did that inspire a poem?
Yeah, so basically there was a line in the episode before last week where Logan, who's the patriarch, says to his adult children that he loves them, but they're not serious people. And I felt like that just really struck me because I feel like, how do you become a serious person? I guess I'm not. But it was just really interesting to me, just thinking about like, what does that look like? And I think, it's arguable on the show that none of these people are serious people for a variety of reasons, but it seemed like such a cut. And that was really interesting to me too, to think about it that way.
Yeah. Well, let's hear the poem, Serious People. Why don't you go ahead and read it?
Yeah. Serious people. That's what we want for our children, isn't it? Shoulders that fit like shoulder pads, not sloping gravel ones, the pieces flying off. I need to make everything small so I can see. Pennies with date stamped because somehow that will matter. Tips of teeth. Someone told me once his biggest fear is death. No, I'm just kidding. It was failure. Like it might come out and eat him. Like the people on the street would somehow know. It's springtime now. I'm watching hawks during my meetings, holding cloud shade on their backs. All the heart-shaped arcs of bees doing their work.
Yeah, and that was Sunday's poem from Poets Respond, Serious People by Elizabeth McMunn-Tetangco. And Elizabeth, I wanted to ask you about your style of writing, because I always love your submissions. I kind of, the submissions are anonymized when I'm reading it, but I kind of always know it's you, because you have a very distinct way of using short lines and really image-rich short lines, and there's the sound that comes through that way. Why do you sort of go about writing poems the way you do? Do you think, and how? And I want to ask too how the revision process goes through. Do you start with longer poems and shrink them down into that really tight, concise package, or do they just come out this way?
So it sort of depends. I was thinking about this one in particular. We went skiing on Thursday, and on the way back, I was kind of like putting some notes in my phone about ideas. And I wrote this really terrible draft that was, horrible. And I was looking at it later and I was kind of like, okay, I feel like I have to kind of get horrible drafts out a lot of times to help me sort of think like, okay, what am I actually trying to say? And what do I not need? And what do I maybe want to add more? So I feel like a lot of it is kind of, trying different things out for me. I feel like when I'm lucky, something will come and it will kind of fit together right away. But a lot of times I feel like this sounds maybe not normal, but I feel like a lot of times I have um, to kind of think about what am I actually saying here and try to kind of structure it that way. I feel like a lot of times when I first start, I'm just kind of like putting things out there because I feel something, but I don't really know how to say what that is yet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's a very good answer.
No, definitely. It's just interesting to see and talk to you more because, you submit poems really regularly and we publish you frequently in the Ekphrastic Challenge. You've won that a couple times and in Poet Respond a few times. I do always look forward to seeing your poems. Thanks for sharing them as always, and thanks for sharing this one on Sunday, Elizabeth.
No, thank you so much.
All right, take care, and I'll talk to you later.
You too.
Yeah, that was Elizabeth McMunn-Tetangco. That was Sunday's poet. Her poem Serious People is on Rattle's website, of course. Now we're going to take a quick break and get to our main guest, Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach. So sit tight and I'll be right back. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Like I said, today's guest is Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach. You'll recognize her from Poet Response segments in the past. She's the author of 3 poetry collections, 40 Weeks from YesYes Books, the new one that just came out, Don't Touch the Bones from Lost Horse Press, which was winner of the 2019 Idaho Poetry Prize, and The Many Names of Mother, which won the Wick Poetry Prize. So everything pretty much wins prizes. She's also a finalist for the Jewish Book Award. She's currently working on a poetry collection as well as a book linked lyric essays, both of which grapple with raising a neurodiverse child with a disabled partner under the shadow of the war in Ukraine, Julia's birthplace. Her poems have appeared in Poetry, Plowshares, all over the place. And she holds an MFA in poetry from the University of Oregon and a Ph.D. in comparative literature and literary theory from the University of Pennsylvania. In the fall of 2023, Julia will join Denison University as assistant professor of English and creative writing. And here she is, Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach. Hey, Julia, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing wonderfully. Thank you so much for having me. at a lovely midday change of hour.
Yeah, and so this is an opportunity, and I should say, thanks for reminding me that there is an open mic later. So this is an opportunity for people who the Rattlecast is too late for the open mic, or it's a bad time for them. This is your big chance to shine on the open lines in about an hour. So have a poem ready. I'll give instructions later. But it is nice to have episodes at different times. We have a couple Irish poets coming up who'll be doing shows at this time on a Monday. So there's a couple more opportunities too, but it is nice to move around a little bit, even though the circumstances were rough. My internet was out all day, and they kept saying like, "Oh, it'll be back on in an hour, it'll be back on in 2 hours," but it never came back on, so we had to postpone. But anyway, I'm so glad to have you here. What do you want to start? Let's start with a poem. What do you want to read first?
So I'll start with the opening poem of 40 weeks, because it's going to be out next week. So I'm really excited to be reading from the early edition copy. I don't even have the final book copies. They'll be coming next week.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. I'll put it on screen for everybody to see. But this is the cover. A beautiful book, by YesYes Books. Just a wonderful production of it. 40 weeks, and then you see the theme, which we can sort of we'll talk about and understand a little more in a little bit. But that is the book from YesYes Books, and let's hear the first poem.
Nature must be a mother to pour thunder, punch through potholes, hoping this will make something, anything, grow. She must be moths, mouth wide, wings panting for lightning. Who else would strike herself? Flame veining the air. Who else would bear children to rise in spring, only to feel them cut months later? The moth's charred outline on a log, the double wound, her children's heads sinking, left to dry on another mother's windowsill. Who else would ask for such a violence?
Yeah, that's such a great last line, that poem. Who else would ask for such a violence? And the question, really the central question is, do we have children? And how do we in the world as it is? And maybe a question that human beings have been asking for as long as there have been human beings. Given the sort of the base nature of humanity is suffering, and there's so much that you're putting forth, you're signing them up for without their consent, I guess you could say. And so the book moves through 40 weeks of pregnancy, and contemplating those kind of questions with the background going on. But let's start out, besides for talking about that, let's start out just in a general, sort of holistic way of how you got into poetry. You mentioned before we came on air that you visited with your one of your first poetry teachers today, of all days. So
it
can you tell us about that?
Magical. And I just talked to, fourth graders and third graders about how I got into poetry with their teacher in the room, who helped me get into poetry. So emigrating from Ukraine, I always grew up hearing Russian language poetry recited in the house, hearing kind of Russian guitar ballads sung by my father. So it was always in my ears, but in Russian. And then when I came here at age 6, that continued, and I memorized a lot of Russian language poems. And then in third grade, there was a unit on poetry, which asked me to write in English. And I didn't feel like I could even speak the language yet, let alone compose the highest art form in it. And my teacher told me to just do it, to write. And that's what I've been doing ever since. I've been writing in the English language to make it my own, to make the music that I hear. Yeah.
That's really a great thing to hear. And that was third grade that started?
Yeah, third grade, and I've been writing ever since. I just never stopped.
So, I mean, your teacher must be really proud, I assume, right?
Yeah, it was such a magical moment. I just, I got to answer her students' questions and recite the first poem I ever wrote in third grade.
Oh, wow. Do you have that with you?
Yeah, I can recite it. I have it memorized. It's super short. It was about springtime.
Mm-hmm.
So it was called Spring. And it goes, cuddle up and keep me warm, to cherish and to love. You are as sweet as the morning breeze that will carry me to heaven. Then the angels will sing, spring is here.
Aw.
So that's third grade Julia, figuring out how to make music in English.
Yeah, that is so sweet. And it's, great to hear, because I'm working on the next Young Poets anthology, too, and that would have fit right in. We would wish we had you in third grade. Um, so everybody is asking already about the use of colons in that first poem. And it's an interesting style. I've never seen it before. So for people who are just listening on the audio podcast, there are those sort of the cut that sort of binds these sentence fragments together. The punctuation mark there, I should put it on screen again if I can find it, is a colon. But you do a colon, so there's a space, colon, space between these fragments of the words. Here, take a look at it again. From nature must be a mother. So to pour, colon, thunder, colon, punch. Through potholes, colon. So what are you thinking when you go through those poems? It's a really interesting style. There's a totally different like cadence that comes across with that. There's a very staccato kind of thing going on. So how did you come to those come to that style of poem, and what does it do for you? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think the first poet I saw doing it, and I'm sure that they're not the first, but that's where I saw it, was Sam Sachs. And they're an amazing poet. Highly recommend you read Sam's work. Their new book, Pig, is coming out, but they have two other books, Madness and, oh my gosh, the other one popped out of my head, but Sam Sachs. Mm-hmm. And the style for me is about building breadth and building these pauses, but also questioning kind of equalities, how one thing compares to another. So it's a way of making metaphor through syntax, almost. A way of comparing sometimes two unlike things through that colon and asking, what's complicated about that comparison? How is to pour the same as thunder, the same as punch through potholes, the same as hoping this will make something? Hoping, and then anything. And so it connects parts of that phrase that comes before and just asks us to question, right? It's a poem, and it ends with questions, and it has rhetorical questions within it. But the syntactic move also is one of questioning and one of opening up of possibilities.
Yeah, I hadn't realized it, but isn't that the structure of those SAT type questions where like, this is to this or this, and then you have to fill in what the last one is. You're supposed to read it in your head. All the teachers say, read your head like a sentence with the comparison there to help you figure out what they're doing. But yeah, so it's like a string of those. It's really fascinating way to go about writing a poem.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it felt like also it mimicked the experience of pregnancy a little bit, where you're constantly moving about the world and being compared to things, comparing yourself to things, and you're constantly, through a colon, so to speak, connected to another entity, another thing inside of you that both is you and isn't you, right? It's that tenuous comparison.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And of course, the book is structured too through those, I assume, emails that you get. I remember those from, where, this week the baby's the size of the size of a peach. This week it's the size of an apricot. It just goes on like that. And so that's how the structure of the book works. So it's just a great metaphor, and then sort of a syntactic metaphor too. It's just fascinating. I really love the structure of the book. I should say too that not all the poems in the book use that style. So it moves through different styles of poem. But that is a predominant form, and it's a really fascinating form too. Let's hear another poem.
Wonderful. So let's move on to Blueberry, week 7. We're starting off early. And Blueberry takes place in November. Not that that matters for the poem, but it's important because it was around my son's birthday. And for me, I will say, like, writing these poems weekly was a way to stay connected to myself as a poet, right? Because pregnancy is very consuming. And then mothering a toddler while pregnant was all consuming. And I wanted a project to keep myself anchored to poetry. So this is the project I gave myself. Week 7, Blueberry. The earth has 2 hidden moons, dust clouds, cosmic tumbleweeds, overripe, innumerable their particles, practically undetectable, and reach so massive for centuries we looked up only to miss it altogether. When your son had to pee, An urge, much like an asteroid's, the day before his third birthday, before you saw his orb sibling wane a clouded screen. He pulled his pants down, the playground full of other children. But there and then he did it, mooning, we call showing our own two hidden globes, a water ray that ships would follow in the night, turned reminder to hide what we've been made ashamed of. The dust and dirt. Our galaxy, mostly flecks and darkness, matter upon matter, not mattering much at all. But tonight you ran with lit up balloons tied to his stroller, neon green and blue and yellow moons, and you thought you felt a waxing light inside. Look, up there, he said, a moving star, edges fogged by dusk. When I am bigger, I will fly. Am I bigger already? Am I the moons? He must wonder, the hidden ones first seen 60 years ago when mooning got its name. But nobody listened then, and the astronomer was too afraid to ask us, look again. Tonight, on his last evening as a toddler, you'll scour the sky for them, their pyramid-shaped glow between the orbits, their audacity to shine instead of shame.
Yeah, another beautiful poem. That was week 7, Blueberry, and of course, Blueberry is the size at week 7. So, and it's just a beautiful poem. And I wonder, about the question of why to have children, why to bring children into the world. Can you talk a little bit about that, about what you go through? Because I went through the same thoughts, and my kids are 8 and 12, so it's been like 10 years or so since those thoughts were predominant. But we're facing a time where things are not like what they ever were, in a way that's it's something that when you have some if you're living in some ancient society and the crops could fail, or like the neighboring horde can come and sweep across and brutalize your village. I mean, there's so many terrible things. The Vikings could appear at your doorstep any day. There's floods and droughts that we have no resistance to. There's all sorts of problems that we've faced as humans. But there's a difference to what's going on now, and because we're facing a change that's sort of global for the first time and not local, even though I don't know if that's a way we would have thought about it before, but also a way that we're changing the what it means to be human in a way that we couldn't, as technology is taking over our way of life, in a way that's increasing ever more rapidly. And so there's a huge difference to now, as opposed to those anxieties in the past, I'd say. So how did you think about those issues as you were planning your family?
I think I will first say that I don't know if it's that things have changed. I mean, they of course have changed, but it's more so our awareness to global atrocity and to catastrophe immediately. And that in those times, right, the horde could come in and destroy your village, but you weren't necessarily aware that a continent away, this horde was already decimating so many villages. So you didn't constantly live surrounded in this residue of trauma, of threat, of atrocity, the way we do with school shootings, the way we do with the war in Ukraine, the way we have with this immediacy of news and technology. And I think for me, as an immigrant who came here as a refugee from Ukraine, as a Jewish writer, this instinct to have children, this deep need, is one of survival, right? It's the need to continue to create the next generation so that they can be better than us, so that all of our mistakes that we've made, they can, if not forgive, but move beyond and do better. And I have the final poem I'll read is on that question, But I think that's a lot of what it is for me, is this, desire for them to be better, and desire to give them something better than what I was given, even though my parents did everything, to give me the best life possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I want my children to have less shame, to have less inscription into this traumatic history than I felt I was inscribed into. Even though, of course, I'm sure I'm doing the same thing, right? We all try to do better than our parents and often end up doing much of the same.
Yeah, we definitely do. Yeah. And it's interesting too. I mean, we wouldn't be here, of course, if that drive wasn't so strong. It evolved to the point where, it was huge evolutionary pressure to have that thought, at least, that we can make it better and that we have to, and there were need to keep going on, or else we wouldn't be here. And anybody who didn't have that drive, their people died out, and that the people that had that drive in the face of every kind of calamity are the ones that are here to make us, and then we continue that thread. There's a way too that it feels, I mean, I remember those thoughts so distinctly, and it feels so silly in retrospect in a way, because when you see the human beings that you create, you're like, how could I even have thought that their lives are something that would be not, that they might not want. I mean, and then you think about your own life, like I would want the life, I mean, there's no way that you could not want the life you've been given. And so it's sort of, it ends up being this weird, this twisty sort of circular logic where it almost seems absurd that you had those thoughts to me, but then we did though, So does it feel that way too? Does it, once it's happened, does it feel like, well, of course we did this?
To some extent, but also, I don't know, seeing genocide happen over and over and over again. On the one hand, it doesn't feel as absurd, because as much as we almost place all this hope on the next generation, it also takes the agency away from us, right? Like, oh, they'll be better, those next ones. But what about us? And what, is our only way of making it better to just create more of ourselves? Or is there more that we can do and that we can have agency over? And, for me, that's part of my impulse to write and to keep creating. But I think, I don't know, I think all those feelings are quite valid, and to not, as much as you want to give them all these beautiful things and all of these experiences, there's a cost, and the risk of suffering that comes with it.
Yeah, really the certainty of suffering, I mean, suffering is the fundamental backdrop of humanity. We're aware of our own suffering, and that's what makes us unique, and that's what makes us plan and prepare and have imaginations, but we pay the price for that, which, religions have, symbolically explained through stories and myths. You mentioned the news being a primary culprit for sort of the general anxiety that we have, and I think that's completely true. Because by a lot of objective measures, the world is better than it's ever been. Like we have, just all across the world, the rate people are being lifted out of poverty is just something that's never been seen before in the history of the planet. Even though there are wars everywhere, there are fewer, wars and fewer deaths than there ever have been. Your chance of dying at that is lower than it's ever been. There's all sorts of ways that our lives are better. We're more connected. We're more open and tolerant than we've ever been. We're more understanding of other people. The ability to communicate. I mean, just so many metrics are better. But then the news makes it feel worse. So do you feel the impulse to turn away from all of that and not address it? Because you address it so well through poetry. With Poet Respond, you've done a lot of poems in Poet Respond that address really hard, difficult things. Is there an impulse to ignore it and just turn off the news and not pay attention and have your own life, as nice it is just the only thing you focus on?
I think I need more of that. I think I had to do that for my own self-care and self-preservation about 3 months into the war, from the end of February 2022 to March, April to May, maybe to April. I was just so every day, hours and hours. And then I had to survive April and May by completely turning off the news and listening to 90s alternative pop rock and just singing loudly in the car, and living in the moment. I think for me, that's something I am trying to do more of in general, is just being more present, both on the page and in my life, being more present in the moment.
Yeah. Well, let's keep the poems coming. Next up, I think we have. What would you like to read next?
Well, I'm going to read, maybe let's do this. I'll read week 9,
Yeah.
which is, so this book, in a funny way, I say it's my least overtly Jewish book. I hardly talk about Jewishness in it. So probably it's my most Jewish book because it's my least overt about
That's
it.
funny.
But this is the one poem where it's overt. And I'll just use that as a transition to talk a little bit about Yom HaShoah, which is Holocaust Remembrance Day, which would have been on Monday when we were supposed to have our Rattlecast. So this is week 9, grape. Louse, the singular form of lice, small, wingless, you'd never heard of because you never find just one, like the note from your son's school saying, one girl has them and she's been treated, and you should check every tangle of your son's curls to make sure some haven't found their way inside. And another mother says she'd buzz it all off just to be safe, says he's a boy, so he'll look tougher anyway. And you recall how you were 3 then too, when your parents nearly shaved you, and the other kids wouldn't share the bench, would run away and yell and point, would laugh, how you were infected and dirty and a louse, ruined, Jewish. So you'll refuse to cut his hair and scour each perfect ringlet, twist their multitudes around your fingers. And when you find only more locks, you'll tell him to sit with Evelyn tomorrow, to remind her she is beautiful and loved.
And that was week 9, Grape, again from 40 Weeks by YesYes Books, Julia's newest. Can you talk a little bit about how your faith relates to poetry? Is there something? I mean, to me, poems always seem like prayers, regardless of which faith you're talking about. They feel like prayers to the unknown of the world, or to, which is God. It's all the same kind of thing, which is the mystery of life and why we're here. And to me, poetry always feels very spiritual. No matter how directly spiritual or tied to one religion the poet is, it just always has that sense of speaking to a higher power. Is that something that's really important to you in the way you think about what a poem is?
So I'll backtrack by first saying that for me, my Jewishness is much less a faith, and more my ethnicity, my culture, a part of who I am. It's an identity that in the former Soviet Union is racialized, right? And it was marked on our passports as we were Jewish. So my parents were forbidden from doing many things. They couldn't get the degrees they wanted. I have a seminal childhood memory of neighborhood boys throwing stones at me and calling me Žid, which is the derogatory, term for Jew. So there are all of these bits, and those to me feel very ingrained in my identity. And my faith or my spirituality is far less tied to organized religion, even though I feel myself deeply Jewish. Mm-hmm. That said, when I write, it is a very spiritual act. And I do feel like, as, kind of whimsy as it sounds, that especially when I'm reciting, when I'm reading, even more so than when I'm composing, that I'm kind of overtaken by the poem, by the spirits, the memories of my ancestors, wherever they may be. I don't know. But I do feel very much embodying a kind of connection to the past, connection to history, connection to ancestry. And that's a kind of faith for me.
Yeah, I mean, when you're writing and reciting too, it's really easy to feel the sense that, that must have come about as holy books were being created. The feeling that you're the conduit of something different that's not yourself. That's what we talk about so much as poets, of like losing yourself in the poem, and surprising yourself, saying things that you didn't know you knew. And so, the idea that that comes from an actual physical God is really you can see how that thought emerges and it's shaped the course of history. And so there's a way that poetry just always does that to me, and it's interesting to hear that too. Well, do you want to read the other poem, the Holocaust poem that we're going to do on Monday,
Yeah.
but still is relevant, of course.
Yeah. So Monday was Holocaust Remembrance Day, and this beautiful new anthology just came out called Contemporary Writers Confronting the Holocaust, and it was a really fascinating and difficult project where writers were asked to respond to archival photos, in an ekphrastic way. And I have to be honest, I struggled with it because I am such a writer tied to my own history, and I didn't feel it was authentic for me to inhabit this, this archival image by trying to look through it. So my way was to turn to form, which it often is with these difficult subjects. So I turned to a villanelle, my favorite form. And it was to tie it back to an imagining of my own great-grandfather who stayed in Kiev as a partisan during World War II, during the Holocaust, and most likely died in Babin Yar in September of 1941, which is the largest, two-day massacre during which 33,000 Jews were murdered. But his name isn't in any archive, so we don't know what happened to him. So this is imagining my great-grandfather before he was a partisan, before he was a father. Perhaps like them he sat, feet wrapped or sinking into sand, mouth full of waiting. Hands stained our people's sacred texts. But no, not by the synagogue steps. Perhaps like them he sat only beside a river, where even Jewish he could blend with Ukrainian birch, mouth full of waiting. Hands transforming bark to body, leaving shadowed prints for us to find. Perhaps like them he sat not knowing it would end, or knowing far too well how forests fall, mouths full of waiting, hands unable to keep up with all the bones or names. Perhaps like them he sat, a mouthful of waiting hands.
And I was imagining my great-grandfather before he was a partisan, before he was a father, from this book, this anthology, Contemporary Writers Confronting the Holocaust, New Voices, edited by Howard Debs and Matthew Silverman. And that's going to be the topic for the show in 2 weeks. So we have, I think, 10 contributors from that, from the anthology coming up. And Howard, who put it together, is going to be here too. I think someone else who worked on constructing the anthology too will be here. So we're going to be exploring that. How much do you feel a duty to write about the topic of the Holocaust and about your ancestry like that? As a writer, do you think that it's something that you feel like you need to do?
Yeah, I feel a really strong impulse to do so, especially because so often as a writer, I was told to write about something else. Like, why do you keep writing about all this? It's in the past. And in fact, I shared with the third graders this morning that in grad school, a colleague of mine told me once, why don't you just write about fields? Like, write about a field or a flower and have that field or flower make me think about the Holocaust. And I think that's so dismissive to our obsessions, to the things that drive us, and to the things that we feel a calling to say. And I really, for me, as I said, it is a connection to my ancestors, and I feel like I have to write it. My mother has said, why, you got to stop writing about your great-grandmother. She's just turning in her grave. You won't let her rest. And I think that's what she would want. I can't let it rest, because that's when we are most at risk, is when we forget our history, when we think that it is past and not present. And particularly now with everything that's happening in Ukraine, it's terrifyingly ghostly, the similarities and the overlaps in atrocity on the very same soil. So it's all of, the atrocity around the world are just reminders about how little we've learned and how much we need to keep saying it differently, keep using different forms or the same forms, but doing something new with them, in order to make a difference, to make a change.
Yeah, there's so much talk, right now about AI and Chat GPT and stuff. So it's interesting to hear you talk about the idiosyncrasies of our obsessions, which are really what makes poetry come alive, is the uniqueness of each individual person and what we're drawn to and driven toward. And it's just an example of how that's never going to work, as large language models are not going to write poems because they don't have these kind of obsessions that we do, and don't have the kind of emotional motivation and to tell certain stories and to try to get to the reality that we're trying to sort of grapple with as we create art and make meaning out of the chaos of experience. How do you know, like, when you're sitting down to write, like I don't know what your writing process is like. Do you write frequently? Do you write, or is it just as you find time? Do you have a certain time? But when you encounter the page, how do you know what you're going to be writing about? Because the topic of the Holocaust is so different from the topic of what you're writing about in this book, 40 Weeks. So, I mean, you had that, for this book, you had the once a week you would write a poem based on that email. Is that always something that you do? Do you always have some kind of prompt to push you in a certain direction, or how do you confront the blank page?
So not always, but I do find that the busier I am, the more prompts, or like using the same title, or, the great thing that Poets Respond asks us to do is just to write a poem based on a news story. I find that that's really helpful. But in general, I find, some people find the blank page intimidating. I find it inviting. I don't feel like I always know what I'm going to write about. But I write constantly, frequently. I'm not afraid to write bad things. I write tons of bad things. That's how you get to grains of goodness. I do a lot of 30-day writing challenges where I'll write, one poem for 30 days. And usually those aren't prompted. It's just whatever comes to me, and I'm in community doing that. And from doing that about, I would say, 3 to 4 times a year, that's, a lot of days of writing, like 90 to 120 days of writing. Out of that, you're going to get a batch of 30 poems, maybe 40 if you're lucky. It depends. Mm-hmm. But lately I've been writing a lot of lyric essays too. So I'm a constant producer. I like to produce a lot. For me, it's my way of moving about the world. I often really don't know how I feel or what I think about something until I write it, and until I am genuinely surprised by where I've gone, mm-hmm. which is what I love about poetry and nonfiction, and why I just can't write fiction. I've tried. But I can't plan from point A to point B to point C. That's boring. I don't want to know where I end up, even though, I know in fiction the characters evolve and all this stuff, but you have to have some kind of arc. In a poem, that's the joy. There's no arc. There's a meandering. There's, it's not a labyrinth where there's a center. It's not even a maze where there's a way in and out. It's just, you have no idea where you're going to go. And I love that. I love the discovery of where I'm going to end up. Yeah.
There's a question, or not really a question, but there's a discussion about advice and people talking and obsession. And Lisa Seidenberg on the chat, which I'm reading, says, it takes a while to ignore the voices that tell you what and how to write. Have you ever struggled with that, about people expecting you to write a certain way or a certain thing? And how do you overcome the sense that you have to listen to those? Because you don't. I mean, becoming an artist and developing your unique style is all about ignoring that while also taking what could be good advice too. So how do you navigate that? Those voices that might be telling you no, or trying to make you do certain things in a certain way.
I think the loudest voice is your own. It's that self-critic that tells you, oh, whatever I've just said isn't worth saying. Or don't, edit this, revise it, don't write it. That's always the loudest voice, and that's the one we have to silence first and just put it on the page. You can figure out what you're going to do with it later. Maybe it is terrible, but maybe from that terrible thing, you're going to get a gem. And I've always really tried to find my readers, and that, in terms of writing community, both within my peers and within my teachers. And those are the people who are listening not to what they want out of a poem and the kind of poem they want, but who are listening to my poem, to what my poem wants to do. And that's a very, different thing, because I've had lots of teachers who have tried to make my poems what they want in a poem. I had a teacher read a 12-page sequence that's, central to my book, The Many Names for Mother, and tell me that line, lemons cut in perfect circles on a gold-rimmed plate. Do more of that. And that was his comment for all of the 12 pages. And so I knew he wasn't my reader.
Yeah.
If that is what you're looking for, that is not my reader. But the teachers who have told me, oh, you're writing about your great-grandmother again? Yeah, do it. Keep doing it. Keep writing. Because if we're driven to write about the same thing over and over again, there's a reason. And that might mean we haven't found the right form yet. That might mean we haven't actually sung the song. We haven't told the story. We haven't done it justice yet. And maybe we never will. Some writers spend their whole lives circling around this same obsession, trying to get as close to it as possible. I think that's, for me, why I also now turn to writing some nonfiction, is that I'm just still trying. I'm trying always to find ways in and out of the story and of the song. So that would be my biggest piece of advice, is to silence that inner critic and silence anyone that's not listening to what's happening on the page and that's looking for what they want out of it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. That's why I love Ian McGilchrist and his idea, his books about the bifurcated brain, and the way that we're really two minds. And what we're really trying to do when we have an obsession is where the right holistic brain is trying to tell us something, that we haven't been able to articulate. And if it takes, obsessing over something for all through an entire book to come to that conclusion, that's the message that we're trying to get to, and sort of put into a concrete form that makes sense and we can hold and carry with us. And that's what all art really is. And so that's why I think, right toward your obsession is such great advice. And the other thing I was thinking too, as you're talking, is that in a writing workshop, I think that you have to sort of be, and this is important for everybody to know, because everybody ends up in writing workshops all the time, even if they're just doing the critique of the week. The main thing that you have to take away is like what advice to listen and what advice to ignore, because there's so much that you have to ignore. And I've seen so many poems where, I'll write to the person, which I do so much less now that we get 300,000 poems a year. But back when I used to do more of like, this section was great, but this was like, something feels off here. It would so often be that like, yeah, that's the section I revised. And I was like, well, let me see the original. And then, you'd see the original, and it was the same voice that sort of sung the same song, and they'd ruined it by workshopping it. And that happens so much. So knowing what advice not to listen to is such an important thing, while also knowing that some advice is good. So there's a real difficult balance to confront as a writer, as you're approaching that kind of environment.
And also that brings us to save all of your drafts. People now with the computer, right, just change it, but then you don't know where you started. So it's so important to save kind of that first breath as it comes out of you. Even if you end up chopping it up and cutting so much out of it, you want those drafts to go back to. Yeah,
that's definitely great advice too. Still talking about, I want to get back to poems, but it's sort of on topic of how you write in your process. Dick Westheimer, who is a runner too, I know you're a runner because I've seen you like with marathon photos and stuff on Facebook, but he has to write while you run. And I think if I'm thinking of the right story, I might get this totally wrong, but I think somebody told me that Gregory Orr is a jogger too, and that he writes with a big notebook in his or runs with a big notebook in his pocket, and actually like pulls out and like writes while running and doesn't really stop, and then keeps going when he has ideas.
Wow.
I think it was I think that's who I'm thinking of, but hopefully I'm not wrong about that. But anyway, do you do anything like that as a writing part of your running process? Is it like a meditative space, and does that have anything to do with generating poems?
It does, but for me, writing is my way of turning my brain off. That is why I do distance, because it's like those first 5 miles, like this morning I did a really quick 2 miles. Ugh, that wasn't enough to get me out of my head. That's why I started training for like distance runs, because by mile 6, 7, 8, yeah, your body's hurting enough that your brain's turned off. So my running is in order to like clear my head so that I can write. That said, there are times when I get lines in my head when I'm running. I still haven't written this poem, but when I was marathon training last year here in Arkansas, I saw a cerulean bunting. That's what it's called. It's a cerulean bunting. And it's this bird that seemed like it came out of the tropics. I mean, the color of that like cerulean blue is unreal. And I had to stop, and I pulled out my phone and I spoke into it. I often, if I'm walking, I will write and I will speak into the phone. I find that feature is really helpful in catching a different music, a different cadence. Some of the poems in 40 Weeks were spoken into my phone while walking, pushing a stroller, and just speaking into the phone. So both yes and no. It's critical to my writing process, and that it clears my head and de-stresses me. And then, yeah, sometimes poems do come to me, but never gonna run with a notebook. We got the phone now. I'm just gonna put it in one of my, hundreds of draft emails of started poems that are unfinished.
You slipped and said writing turns your brain off, and you meant running at the beginning.
Yeah,
which raises a really interesting question. I wonder if that was sort of, your what you didn't know you knew speaking. Does writing turn your brain off too? Is that part of the process? Because it feels like that for me, in a way, you're turning off one section of your brain anyway. And then the difficulty of getting into that writing space is like, how do you turn off that section that just wants to regurgitate garbage, I guess you could say.
Possibly.
Yeah.
I think that's a very necessary Freudian slip, in that writing lets me surrender my brain. It doesn't turn it off, but I surrender to it. I surrender to its kind of free flowing. And running detaches me from the brain and puts all the emphasis in my body. So, but writing sometimes detaches me from my body. So there's a really interesting kind of mind-body dynamic that's different in those two acts. And yet, what I find is really critical about kind of being a person that focuses on any kind of physical activity as well as creative is that it helps me stay vigilant in my creative process. Because I know that if I haven't run in a week and then I go to a run, that run's going to be really challenging. Same with writing. If I haven't written in a week or 2 weeks, that first time sitting down, you're rusty. So writing is also a kind of exercise, a kind of muscle building. That's why I compose so frequently, because even if what I write is bad, bad, quote unquote, the exercise of my brain doing this act, surrendering to the act of writing, is strengthening and building, and will set me up to write a stronger poem next time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just great advice overall, and people are saying that in the comments. But I want to make sure we get through enough, good number of poems. Let's do another poem. I think you had Lime is next. Is that the one you want to do?
Yeah. So we'll go to Lime, because it's the way in which this book, as I said, is minimally engaged with its Jewishness. But in Lime, it was a poem that deals directly with the Holocaust without me thinking that's where I was going to go, but it took me there. Week 12, Lime. The face looks unquestionably human, the update tells you. Eyes have moved from sides to front of the head, ears right where they should be, and you wander your fingers along their possibilities, wondering what human means. They say inhuman. For the centuries, your ancestors were cut from bellies, their ears hung around men's necks, their eyes backed into the skull or swallowed whole so gold would grow inside another's gut. Or else they were burned so no man could taste such wealth. Inhuman, for the women sewn back to back by men, their bellies growing away. So when they pushed, they'd show what body part tears first, the stitch or skin. Inhuman for a man taking you without consent, for all the taken women. But what's more human than such violation? From Latin, humanus, of man. How can your unborn child unquestionably come from this?
Yeah, and that was week 12, Lyme, again from 40 Weeks by YesYes Books, the newest from Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach. So that question of why, why have children? It seems to me there's the question in there too that mirrors that is why write poems? In the face of so much suffering, in the way that a poem doesn't really change the world. Why write? Like, what is the motivation to write? Like, why write anyway? In the face of inhumanity and in the face of sort of the indignity that poems face as well, because you're not gonna sell thousands of copies of this book. You know that going in. So why poetry?
I think the answer, it's a lovely way to parallel those two questions. And I think the answer is the same: survival. For me, it's my way to survive the day. It's my way to survive the week. And it's my way to leave something that survives beyond me. And I don't mean that as like, I'm going to be read when I'm dead. But it's more that it moves. The way poems move about the world is so magical that you put something out and then someone reads it and is changed by it. So I don't know, Tim. I don't know if I agree with you that poems don't change the world. I think they do. I really think they do. I think they sometimes on a small scale, but sometimes on a large scale. Like those, few poems that I've published on Poets Respond have raised such awareness for something that's going on. People who had no idea what was going on in Ukraine, despite it being in the news. They've raised lots of money for aid organizations. So I don't know. I am a big believer that poems do change the world. Maybe it's naive, but that's part of why I write, because I want them to change the large world or the small world. Like I want a mom, or someone who's experiencing that to hold this book and read it and feel seen, and feel less alone in the doubts and the questions and the bodily grossness that this book really explores openly and says, stop making this a taboo. Like, this is what happens with our body. Like 50% of humans experience this, and 100% of humans have come out of a body. 100% of them. So everyone has some connection to pregnancy and childbirth, whether personally or, having been born of a body.
Yeah, well, that's a great answer. I feel a little guilty because it was a sort of a loaded fake question. Because of course I think poetry, has value and changes the world. It's how we make meaning. It's how we create meaning out of the complexity of life. And even if you don't sell thousands of copies of the book, it doesn't matter because we're creating like human existence, by the minute. And, we're doing that every time we say a metaphor spontaneously that helps us make sense of the complexity of existence. But then as poets, we're writing that down and recording it and sharing it in a way that you don't do, when you're casually riffing off a metaphor or something like that. And so we're creating existence itself through words in poetry. Absolutely. And so of course I think so, but I have to set it up that way.
Right, Marianne Moore, poetry. I too dislike it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? There must be more beyond all this fiddle.
Yeah, exactly.
And then she fiddles for all the stanzas. So absolutely.
Well, I want to, if you have any questions, there's a couple questions up, but if you have any questions for Julia, we have a little bit more time. So leave them in the chat window, either on Facebook or YouTube, and I'll pass them along. But I want to make sure we get to a few more poems. So let's do another poem.
All right, let's do Rutabaga, since people seemed very interested in all of the colons. Rutabaga is week 25 Rutabaga, and it's kind of like I would say the center poem of the collection. Week 25 Rutabaga. Stretch marks run in the family. Looking down at your growing, purpling stomach, you see your mother's. Pinkish gray ladder rungs no one's fingers would willingly climb, cracks in polar ice, streaks of soapy water dried on shower glass, riverbeds raw after a drought, a gathering of dimming stars ripple where your son's nail slid your shoulder blade. You love my imperfections, you say, the stria rising from your pelvis, pale stitches where you were never cut or sewn back together, where you expanded, then contracted down, a balloon or bulbs or supernova, a body you are still in awe of. A pregnant body changes more in 9 months than most in their whole lifetime. Her uterus amasses 20 times its weight. Her blood turns darker blue, skin flays without breaking, rivers and rivers on her belly. It's bigger. Your son digs his elbow in to make a valley, apologizes to the flesh. I love your belly, he says, sees the marks, kisses anyways, takes his palm and ear to them. They're all your perfections, your husband tells you. And you look up where perfect comes from. Etymology, easier to bear than skin. From Middle English and Old French, parfait, finished, complete, brought to full development. But there are still so many rivers to grow, so many months to look more like your mother, to fight your body's generational becoming perfect. The tense, a retrospective present, connects a past occurrence with a current one. Your stomach, a cosmos, constellations only beginning to glow, though its stars must have died long ago, rivers and rivers, for their light to trail down a mother's skin.
Yeah, another beautiful poem that was week 25, Rutabaga, and like you said, a central poem to the collection. So I love that style. There's a great rhythm and there's the way it works. But I also love that it's not every poem. I think that if you wrote every poem that way, it would become too much or too gimmicky or something. So it feels like the perfect amount in a way that I'm not sure if you. It seems to me like it'd be hard to consciously construct that as you're going through week by week in the book. So can you talk a little bit about how the book came to be as a book? And two, just we mentioned how many every book you win has won some award, and that's why it's being published where it is, pretty much. And can you talk about the process of going through that publication and making a book and getting out in the world, which is so difficult. So many people have a book they want to get out. Is there a lot of revision process in the book? Like, did you have more of a certain kind of poem, and then you change them around to make how did the book become constructed?
So I have to say this book is a fluke. A fluke in that the other two books were so constructed and so revised. And I remember mentioning my first book, it took me 5 years to get it published. And then the second two were picked up within a week of one another.
Oh, wow.
But this book, I didn't know I was writing a book. I just knew I was writing a poem a week to stay sane. And YesYes has this wonderful Pamet River Prize, and it's through nomination. So you can nominate your own work or someone else can nominate you. And the poet Kelly Grace Thomas, who won the Rattle Metaphor Prize way back, she had been reading these poems and she said, Julia, I'm going to nominate this. And I was like, Kelly, I'm pregnant. I've written 2/3 of the book. I don't know. How are you going to nominate it? She's like, you only need 20 pages. So send me 20 pages. I'm going to nominate it. And I was like, all right, I guess I'll do it. I sent her the 20 pages I had. It was a finalist. And then I needed to submit the full book. So I delivered my daughter on June 19th and the book was due July 15th. And I pulled it together. I wrote the last poem of the book in the hospital room with my daughter at week 40. I was writing it on my phone. And so I have to say that this book really did go through minimal revision. The poems themselves I would come back to and massage. but I wanted this book to stay true to the immediacy of the experience.
Yeah.
And if a poem felt unfinished, then that's what it meant to be. So for example, in the book, you'll see I have week 2, or what are we? Week 2 again, week 3 again. There's nothing written. It's like and then week 5 and 6, they don't exist. There's just, sesame seed and lentil. They don't exist. And I wanted to stay true to that. And I gave myself the freedom to do so. But somehow I pulled a poem out every other week from then on. Those are the only places. And I love that you ask about kind of the form, because I really did let the weeks determine their own forms. So I have like a couple of split line poems in the book because that's what felt true to the week. More traditional couplets. I've got a counterpunctual in there where the poem can be read in multiple directions. I just let the weeks, I let myself play. It was a book where I really let myself play with where that object, that fruit, that veggie took me, whether it stayed with the fruit or veggie or whether it moved completely outside of it.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear because it reminds me of a line from a poem. I can't remember whose, unfortunately, but someone says, the flowers look so beautiful, they must be artificial. And so it feels like so carefully choreographed in its like organicness that I thought you must have put a lot of thought into making it feel that way. So to hear that it's actually organic in the way, because I love those breaks, where you can sort of, when you get to those poems where there's no poems, you can sort of feel like the exhaustion in those weeks, and then just like the emotional load and like there just couldn't be poems, but it feels like maybe that was planned. So it's really cool to hear that.
No, that was just sincere exhaustion. And in fact, my editor she was like, I've never had this few edits. Truly, it's so done. And then there were a couple of poems, I think 2 of them, where she said this poem just isn't as strong as the rest. And I was like, yeah, that's what that week was, and that's where I'm going to keep it. I mean, I worked on some, but I really, again, wanted to stay true. Some weeks, that's all I had. And so I wanted that to be on the page as genuinely true to the experience.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's come up in time, you said we go, can you stay a little later so we can get the last couple poems in too?
Yeah, not a problem.
Okay. Yeah, so let's do the second to last poem, and then I'll take the questions we had from the audience just now, and then we'll do the last poem too, so we get all the ones you want to share in.
Great. So we're gonna do Cantaloupe, and then I'm gonna throw something in just for you that I haven't done before, but I'm gonna try it out because I haven't read it before. So there's gonna be some Russian singing that comes in, and it's just gonna come in. So we'll see. You can let me know if you feel it works. If you feel like, don't put it in. Okay. Week 34, Cantaloupe. The first color they see is red, the second a deeper still. Your son asks about blood, wants to see it rise to the surface. There are times you forget to flush. He sees traces, bites his tongue or the inside of his cheek while eating cantaloupe. Red streaks the fruit's flesh, rock melon, skin like the moon's. He asks why his mouth fills with pennies, copper. The shade of orange turns when mixed with blood. The taste of oxidization, too much air and rust. He asks you to kiss his tongue and inside where it hurts. Asks you to sing about hands because the other night you wept singing «А ты опять сегодня не пришла». And he was charmed, delighted even. А я так ждал, надеялся и верил. By the startle of your crying. Что зазвонят опять колокола? Why are you crying, mama? И ты войдешь в распахнутые двери. You lied. It was a sad song, said nothing of where you're hurting, closed your eyes and sang in the womb-like dark of his bedroom about the man in love who begs the bells to ring again, so the one he loves would return home and he would kiss her chapped red hands.
Oh, that was gorgeous. And I think everybody is going to agree. Like, every time you read that poem, you should do the singing. That was great. It really, really set the atmosphere too. I love that. That was Cantaloupe, week 34 from 40 weeks. Let's see. So back to the questions we had. Where was this? So Guy Chambers, we were talking about revision before, and Guy wanted to know if you ever go back to your older poems and rewrite them. Is that something that you do as part of your revision process, or do you sort of leave? But I feel like you can't step in the same river twice. I can never go back, and I'd have to rewrite it from scratch if it didn't work. But how do you ever get back into a poem?
I do. I rewrite quite a lot. As I said, I do like 30-day grinds, and so I have them marked by the months. So like I'll have, June of 2020, and I'll want to go back to June of 2020, and I will step into that river. But maybe it's not even a river. When I step back into it, it's become an ocean or a lake, or maybe it's a puddle. That's really the thing. Maybe it was a puddle all along. But yeah, I really do. I love stepping back in. I find that the more you write, the more challenging stepping back in actually gets, because you have such an idea, or a better idea of where you want something to go. And if it doesn't go there, then I might, it didn't go. But I do challenge myself to step back in, especially if like there's nothing, you feel like, I got nothing in me today. I pull out old poems, and I see what I can get out of them. Maybe it'll just be a line. Sometimes I'll take the last line of a poem and use it as the first line of the next one. It's a really great exercise.
Yeah, that is definitely great. And I have done, I've rewritten poems, but I just haven't. I don't know. I just, once they're too far gone, they're just like, it's a different person who wrote them.
Yeah.
So it's tough. It's always tough for me. Dick Westheimer wants to know if you can see putting together a book of poems that are not thematic, which is a question we've talked about a few times on the Rattlecast, that more and more books of poetry always have themes, it seems, and our chapbooks almost always have themes. And I think it's maybe part of the contest model of poetry that it's much more easy to pick a poem and to market a book as a publisher when you can say, like, this is what it's about. So you can think of the ways that, who you would spread it to and how you would describe it. Do you think a theme is sort of vital to a book or not? Because I haven't read all your books. I've read 2 of the 3, and they both have strong themes. So is that something that you feel tied to with themes or not?
I mean, I think a theme is vital to me as a poet. I don't know how I would write a book where they weren't connected. I think everything I write to some extent has threads with everything else I write. I mean, I could see maybe one day when I'm much older and I have a book of these are the poems that fit into nothing that I've put out. And it'll just be a kind of hodgepodge. But I even think in that hodgepodge, there would be a reason why they didn't fit. And so then they would create a theme all their own, or some kind of ligature, some kind of structure. I think it's kind of, for me as a writer, unavoidable.
Mm-hmm. Another question, we'll just do kind of a lightning round here. Potter O'Donoghue wants to know, is there any room for weakness, uncertainty, and self-deprecation in poetry?
Absolutely. That's where we begin. There's constantly room for self-deprecation. And we begin there, but then I think we reach to rise out of it. It's like the poem tries to silence that critic, even as it moves about, the page or about the air. Yeah. But there's definitely room. And I think you should bring uncertainty and bring awareness onto the page. I tell my students this all the time when they're like, well, I couldn't write this because I didn't know. That's absolutely a reason to engage with that not knowing on the page, not a reason not to write it.
Yeah, really well said, for sure. And last one, the question that guests hate, but everyone in the audience always loves, putting you on the spot for some favorite poets, maybe poets we might not know that you could guide us toward that you can point out.
Ooh, poets you might not know. Okay, let's lead you to some poets you might not know. You should all read Luisa Muradian, who, if you don't know, she's amazing. Actually, you published her Prince poem in Poets Respond one time. Amazing Ukrainian Jewish poet whose work I adore, and it's so funny. I just admire poets who can be funny because I can't.
Yeah, it's
like
tough
fine but not on the page.
Mm-hmm.
And then some Ukrainian poets. Iya Kiva is fantastic, and there's translations of her work. And then I would love to just champion some like books that have come out this month because they're so good. Jessica Q. Stark's Buffalo Girl, I just got in the mail, is so good. Katie Ferris's Standing in the Forest While Being Alive is incredible. Eugenia Lee's Bianca, they're just so good, and they all just came out. So I will rather than favorite poets, because I have so many, these are just poets with books that are fresh and hot off the presses. And my pressmate, Allison Blevin's book, Cataloging Pain, also, I mean, highly recommend.
Oh, very cool. I didn't know Eugenia Lee had a new book. She was the guest last year or two ago. Maybe have her back for a short segment to share that. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, Bianca's fantastic, out from Four Way.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, well, let's finish up with that last poem you had on the list, and to unfortunately close out the interview, because it's been a great one. So much great advice and digging into what poetry really is. I love it.
So this will just answer your question, right, Tim? Or, raise more questions. Why have children when the world is ending? Killer whales have stopped reproducing. Polar bears are eating their cubs. Koalas abandon their young, breathless, nose low to the brush to keep from choking on rising smoke. They run towards the thousands, pounds of food we airdropped where Earth stopped burning, or flames just hadn't reached yet. Guilt for our part in this end, or fear it would come for us the same. We tell ourselves everything just wants to survive. Believe in life as circle, not line. In karma, if it means our endurance. We spread stories about wombats herding animals into their burrows, kangaroos hugging their rescuers, or foxes feeding baby bears uncharred Kandai milk. But animals know to rely on no one. Their own scathed hides and carcasses pile the roadside along bus routes to the local preschool. The children we chose to have must fight, gagging at the smell. My infant daughter screams at us for plugging the bulb syringe deep into her nostril. She exhales snot mixed with my milk, screams again, then sleeps. She doesn't know we've made this quiet possible. She turns her head away where breathing comes easiest and reaches for a warm body as soon as she can smell it close. She doesn't know the coral reefs are dead and sargassum reeks in mounds along Caribbean coastline, starfish suffocated under its spreading. And maybe this is why we've made her, because she doesn't know survival is in our hands, forgives us their indiscretions, and lets us hold her body as though it were a world we could still save.
Yeah, and that was Why Have Children When the World is Ending, the closing poem to 40 Weeks by Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach. Julia, thanks so much for being a guest. It was definitely worth waiting an extra 2 days for. Sorry for everybody who had to wait, but a wonderful show. Love the discussion. Your poems are so good. Thanks for being here, and congratulations on the new book.
Thank you so much. And if you order it, please leave reviews on Amazon and Goodreads, because it makes a huge difference for, us small potato poets. And it's coming out next week. So if you pre-ordered it, you should be getting it next week.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I hope a lot of people did. Thanks, Julia. Once again, it's been great.
Thank you.
And that was Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach. And once again, her book is right here, 40 Weeks. And look at this beautiful cover one more time. 40 Weeks. That just YesYes Books did an amazing job of this. I love the look of it, and throughout the book too. It's really wonderfully produced. Excellent book of poetry. You can find more of Julia's work at her website, which is Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach. That's it's kind of how it sounds. Julia Kolchinsky is Kolchinsky. Dasbach is Dasbach. JuliaKolchinskyDasbach.com. Find her website, find the book there, or through YesYes Books, and you won't be disappointed if you get a copy. So we're gonna go to take a quick break and go to open lines. And as I mentioned, if you're new and you don't usually watch at this time, this is your chance to shine on the open lines. You can share any kind of poems that you would like. You can share poems about current events. You can share poems from the prompt last week. You can share poems that were published recently, something you wrote today, whatever you'd like to share. Here's how you do it. I'm going to put it up on the screen here. Email your poem first to OpenMic. That's openmic@rattle.com. That way I can show the poem on screen as you read it, and everybody who's watching on the stream gets to appreciate it. Then come on over to the Zoom, and I'm going to post the link into Facebook and into YouTube. Only jump over if you'd like to share a poem. If you just want to listen and enjoy all the open mic poems, which I highly recommend, you can just stay right where you are. You're on Facebook or YouTube. But if you want to join the Zoom and share a poem, jump on over and shut down your stream, so you're only watching through Zoom until you do your poem, because that way there won't be two delays and then you'll get all confused with that whole thing. So and you'll have the most bandwidth possible too. So if you want to come over, just come on over on Zoom. Here is the link, and I will be back in just a moment with the open lines. And we're back. Thanks for your patience. Like I said, you can write poems about the prompt if you'd like to share on the open lines. And the prompt for this week was the following. Write an ekphrastic poem about a recent image in your camera roll. And so I was in New York City with Katie Dozier for the NFT NYC conference, and we sort of went around to some of the parks. One of the parks we went to was this beautiful, the cherry blossoms were blossoming in Prospect Park in Brooklyn. And so this is the photo I was looking at. We also had a prompt, or I also had a sort of dual prompt, because when I was flying back in the plane, I asked some people for prompts. I wrote 4 poems on the plane, which is nice. 2 of them actually came out of images from my camera roll too. So maybe I could share the other one too if we have time. But this one was written about Prospect Park and coming to Prospect Park. And and the funny thing is, with Katie, we were in. It's a huge park. And every time we try to leave, there was just more park, and we just kept getting lost. And so her prompt was, oops, hang on, I was hearing some, yeah, I gotta mute Phil Stern. Yeah, so her prompt was to write about the park you can never leave, because the Prospect Park ended up being the park we could never leave. So here's the prompt written on the plane based on that photo and the prompt. So here we go. Typical day. Oh, hang on a second. We keep getting. If you're here, yeah, mute Maybe I didn't put. So if you hear, mute yourself until it's time to share. Okay. So here's typical day. They turned a corner, climbed some concrete stairs, and there it was, the park they'd never leave. It rose from the hill like a dream. There were people and frisbees. A dog chased a ball off its leash. The blossoms were blooming. The bees wove their way through the weeds. It had been quite the journey to get there, all the trains and the transfers, the tokens and turnstiles, the numbers and letters, the red and the blue and the green. Their feet were sore from the walking. Their shoulders were pink from the sun. It was a typical park from a distance, but they knew that it was the one. This typical day. And actually, I say I never write by hand, but I was able. People keep coming up. So Phil, yeah, you got to keep yourself muted. Okay. So, but I have actually handwritten poems here, which I never do. But there was no Wi-Fi in the plane, and apparently Chromebooks don't work without Wi-Fi. There's like nothing you can do. Anyway, that was my prompt poem. If we have time, I'll do the other one. We have 10 people on the Zoom right now. So let's see. Let's go to Katie Dozier first, since we were just talking about Katie. Oh, hang on. Somebody keeps unmuting themselves when they shouldn't. Okay, Phil, stop unmuting yourself, please. Phil Stern. Keep yourself on mute until it's your turn. Okay, Katie, are you there?
The National Gallery of Art, so I might be annoying people.
Well, that's all right. Yeah, so you went down to, after I left New York City, you went down to Washington, D.C. So you're at the National Gallery there. And
yes.
But we had a great time. So I wanted to mention, we had a great time at the NFT NYC conference. There was a panel of NFT poets that we were on, because the summer issue of Rattle is going to feature NFT poets. So we have a dozen poets in that issue. 4 of them originally were scheduled to be on the panel. We ended up with 3 because someone couldn't make it. But it was really interesting. Do you have any like general thoughts about how the conference went and what you learned or anything?
Well, first, comparing it to the NFT NYC that was in London last fall, like there was so much more of a literary presence, which was really exciting to see. You know, I think before the panel that I was on in London was like, I think one of the absolute only one about, you know, publishing and words and spoken words. So it was really exciting to see like way more panels going on. And then people actually came to our panel about poetry. And that was pretty exciting too, I thought.
Yeah, and that was interesting too. And a journalist for Voice of America came up after too. And there's going to be a segment about that as well, which is really interesting. So it was a really interesting panel. And people still probably are confused about what NFTs are and what's going on with them and how that has to do with poetry. But the summer issue, all I want to do is plug the summer issue of Rattle, basically. I'm putting it together right now. It'll be out June 1st with a dozen NFT poets and an interview with Sasha Stiles, where we try to explain it all. And so that should be fun. But you shared, you sent me a link to an NFT poem, a poem that's up as an NFT on Foundation. Yeah. So this is your open mic poem for today, but anything you can say about it before you read?
Well, first of all, what's funny about it is that I'm going to be reading it from a piece of paper.
So irony, yeah.
It being an NFT, there's a little bit of irony. But this actually came from a prompt from you, and it tied into what you and Julia were talking about somewhat, which is, you know, your favorite poets. And I think one of the prompts a while ago was that. And I re-entered this poem in terms of I turned it into an NFT and added photography to it too. So I did that as well. So excuse the piece of paper because I don't know how to technically work it with my phone and gadgets and art. And I have to say the interview was so good, it pulled me away from all the Picassos I was looking at. Like I just sit down to focus.
Well, that's good thing. Hopefully the museum's open for a while so you can go back and enjoy them too.
Hopefully it is. And hopefully they don't kick me out mid-poem. We'll see.
Okay, well, good luck and let's hear it.
All right. Flowers for my favorite poet. He sits without the energy to wave away the rain, gripping a chewed up pencil, too shy for the permanence of pens. This park shakes out strangers like the leaves on turning barren trees. He scribbles on a legal pad jettisoned with raindrops. He writes towards what he cannot reach, wedged between the highest branches of an oak. He tosses aside an umbrella like an analogy in the pursuit of what is instead of what it's like. It started as a bench haiku and bloomed into a sonnet. A crown spouted from blunt lead, but he crumpled it up instead.
Yeah,
so hoping people don't crumple up their poems, put them out there. And I have to say, that one party we read poems at that was so crazy with the NFT wildness going on, flowers makes this very easy. Because the chaos going on, I don't care. So mainly I'm about to write a poem about people taking selfies, like thinking nobody's watching them take selfies right in front of the rotunda. It's very entertaining.
That's really
my
fun.
entertainment.
Well, enjoy and hope you write a bunch of poems today. I should say, too, that Katie and I do the Poetry Space on Twitter every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Tomorrow we're going to be doing that, talking about National Poetry Month, which I hate. So we'll talk about.
And I love.
And Katie loves. So we'll disagree about it. I'm sure most people like it, but I'm not a fan. But we'll talk about why on the Poetry Space tomorrow, which is another podcast that we do. But thanks, Katie. Good to see you, and continue enjoying those Picassos.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the great show.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.
Yeah, that was Katie Dozier with Flowers for My Favorite Poet. Next, let's go to Audrey. Yeah, let's go to Audrey Friedman. Audrey Friedman.
Here I am.
Hey, Audrey. How you doing today?
Good. I didn't even realize you were doing an earlier one, and I get a notification on my phone. So here I am.
Well, that's perfect. I'm glad it works. Yeah, what happened is I had no internet on Monday night, or all day Monday, and it didn't come on until after the show would have ended. So I had to postpone, and this was the time that worked for Julia. So that's when we did it, and it's nice. We get to have some different people. I already see some new people on the open lines. We'll get to the new callers next. I always like to do a couple veterans first, so that the new people can see how it works. But so yeah, have your poem ready when I call, it's your turn, unmute yourself, and then you got to read from your own piece of paper. But here, Audrey, so what do you have for us?
Okay, so I did the prompt, and this was a photo that was on my phone, and here we go. A Congress of old oaks convenes to continue their centuries-old debates, considering the state of things. Of what do they speak? Of whom? They are skirted by purple pansies and pink peonies that look up reverently as the conversation continues, leaves speaking in the South Carolina spring breeze. Sunshine burnishes each leaf, each a word of the dialogue. Of what do they speak? Of whom? If only we could transplant ourselves as saplings, we might learn the language of the sages, grow in a cluster of wildflowers, gain the wisdom of the grove of barked witnesses.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thanks for sharing that, Audrey. Is it Congress of Old Oaks? Is that the collective noun for it, or did you make that up?
I totally made it up.
That's great. I love that, a Congress of Old Oaks. Really perfect. And I love that they're considering the state of things. That was really cool. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And for those who can't see, if you're just listening, it's a photo of a park with old oaks and some paths and things like that. So I have to describe the pictures for the podcast listeners. Okay, let's go next to some first-time callers. And I think Barry Casey hasn't been on before. So Barry, just unmute yourself, and then you have to have the poem. You can't read it off the screen because there's the delay. So hey, Barry, how you doing?
Good, thanks. My first time here.
Yeah, excellent. I'm so glad to have you on the show. Where are you calling from?
Burtonsville, Maryland. It's just outside of Washington, D.C.
Excellent. And I'm trying to find the poem. Oh, there it is. I see it. Junkyard.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, but the poem's not included.
Oh, it's not?
Yeah, it's not in the email.
Oh, dang.
Yeah. Why don't we swing back to you? You can email it to me so people can see it too, and I'll just come back to you. Can you email it to me now?
I'll try, yeah.
Okay,
Just
sure.
go ahead and I'll come back.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, yeah, we'll swing back to you. Let's go to another first-time caller then. Susan Edison instead. Hey, Susan. Or
Hi.
Suzanne, sorry.
It's
Suzanne
Suzanne,
Edison.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I sent you 2 poems, but I think I'm going to read the spells and prayers before antimatter. Do you have that one?
Yeah, I have that right here.
Great.
And where are you calling from, first of all? I love...
Oh, I'm from Seattle, Washington.
Ah, perfect. Yeah, well, so good you could call in. Yeah. Is this time better for you than the regular time? Is that the issue, or just happen to be
every
here?
The other time was actually better, but I love Julia's work, so I wanted
perfect.
to.
Okay, well, I'm so glad.
And I had another call,
us.
but I had to, anyway, rearranging work life.
So. Okay, and so what? Is there anything you want to say about this poem before you read it?
It just came out in Mom Egg Review, or MER, their folio online, and because you mentioned ekphrastic, I thought I would take this one.
Ah, excellent. Okay,
So,
well, let's hear it.
yeah. Okay, spells and prayers before antimatter. Step with me into O'Keeffe's painting of a ram's skull, its curvaceous horns. Let it invite travel. Behold the spirals. When a woman says, I'm speaking, hear not a gavel pounding or a hard cell, but 100 doors unhinging. Do not check the floor for blood. She will have bandaged her wounds every step of the way. Imagine yourself protoplasm, fur, feathers, scales, carapace, all of us carbon afterprints. Imagine your body seated and shaken like a shakir, and footfall a score resounding, not safe, not safe, 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 safe. Say despair for the elephants, Amazon forests, and bees, and future generations is the ground we plow. That pain is only one source code, and hope a pole we drop and recoup, walking through our tightrope lives. Let the crab nebula become our ecumenical study. We are born of stellar light winds, light years old. Who knows where our atoms began? Who knows what they will become? Let us not cast words as junk bonds or scrims for our hearts. Do not say love conquers all as if it's a war zone. Let it spread like mycelium, sporing underground, like when we soothe our babies, half awake at night. And let dancing be my legacy, beyond what makes sense. Even an eyelash can flutter. Say smell is truer than sight, and remember touch is the first sense. Let me and you then, fingertip to fingertip, ignite.
Oh, beautiful poem. Very rich in image and metaphor. Thanks so much for sharing that. Spells and Prayers Before Antimatter by Suzanne Edison. Thanks, Suzanne. And where again was it curated recently?
MER, M-E-R, online, Folio online.
Merfolio.
And I think it's volume 21. Yeah.
Yeah, let me type that. Merfolio. Yeah. Oh, from Mama
Mothers
Interview. That's
Respond.
Right. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mothers Respond. Okay, so here we go. I like showing off other literary magazines and things. So this is at merliterary.com, which is Motherhood, Literature, and Art. And then this is the Mothers Respond feature. So check that out with all these wonderful poets that you see on screen. Thanks so much for sharing that and being here, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Yep. Have a good day. Yeah, excellent. So let's go to another first-time caller. And Susan Coronel is here.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Hey, yeah, where are you calling from, Susan?
From Queens, New York City.
Yeah, and so what do you have that you would like to share?
The poem I'm going to read is called My Younger Daughter Resists Tradition, and it appeared in the most recent issue of Passenger's Journal.
Ah, excellent. My Younger Daughter Resists Tradition. Anything you want to say about it before you jump in? Or
I think it kind of fits in maybe with the theme of uprootedness and Jewish heritage.
Yeah.
You discussed with Julia.
Perfect. Well, let's hear it. Go ahead.
My younger daughter resists tradition. She tells me one day, I don't want to take Yiddish classes anymore. In Fiddler on the Roof, the youngest daughter insists on leaving the fold because of true love. But to her father, she's a splinter and a cantaloupe, untethered from tradition and from every family who has ever said, stay, follow, without doing it themselves. True love. A violin shivers naked, trills on a hill, attempting to play a familiar tune. But the music escapes through holes and pockets, beguiles even those with the best intentions, singing, look what you've done. Loss is a bone caught in the throat, a sewing needle threaded not once, but in both directions. The only Jewish tradition left for my daughter is food, matzo ball soup, chocolate coins, herring drowning, and sweet onions and cream. What she does not know is that I am trying to keep my balance on a roof, whose shingles dangle like warped leaves. There are no prayers of devotion, but reams of remorse, the repeated desecration of our culture through history, confirming that we still sit on rotten hands. I care nothing for the temple, empty rituals opening like a can of preserved peaches, but yearn for the parsley sprig. for the Star of David to be twisted and reimagined so my children will not lose what came before without knowing what they're losing, even as I know it's already lost forever. Love is sweet, but better with a bissel of salt, a kiss on the punum. Thieves and the dead I've loved knew darkness like a tattered coat. Children always refuse, but it's still better to ask them to carry something than to come to the table of the future empty-handed.
Yeah, lovely poem. Thanks so much for sharing that. I love that line, loss is a bone caught in the throat. That's really great. Thanks for sharing that and for joining us. Hope you can share more poems in the future. Yeah, that was Susan. Is it Susan Mitchell or Susan Coronel? Because the email.
Susan Michelle Coronel.
Susan Michelle Coronel. Okay, gotcha. Susan Michelle Coronel. Thanks so much for sharing that, Susan. It's great to have you on. Okay. Yeah, and the poem, of course, was My Younger Daughter Resists Tradition. Let's see. Oh, so we have Barry's. We got the poem here. I'm attached this time. So let's go back to Barry.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can, yeah. And I got the poem here, Junkyard, too. Is there anything you want to say about it before you read it?
Yeah, I grew up in the hills above Napa Valley, California, and I was a campus kid. My grandparents taught at the college, and then my first year at college, a young girl was killed in that area, and the blame was put on a man called Willie the Woodcutter. And we went out, 500 of us or more, to search the area one day to try to find her body. So this is a poem about that.
Oh, wow.
Junkyard. We searched all day under the scornful sun. Through tough manzanita and scrub oaks we pushed, casting our net for the dead girl. We'd been told Willie had dumped her body down the side of the hill off the old Howell Mountain Road, as twisted as a snake. I thought about what I would do if I found her. She'd be lying as if asleep under a bush, one arm stretched out, her head back, and her eyes, blue as asters, open to the sky and filled with clouds, a soft puzzlement in them, as if she had awakened in a strange room after a long dream. And Willie? I remembered meeting him years before when I was 10, and his junkyard yielded up a bicycle frame for $5. There you go, son, he said and smiled. He patted me on the head. There in the harsh California sun, his skin so black and his teeth so white, he could have been a wizard in a children's story of a kindly old man deep in the forest whose fenced-in yard contained the treasures of a lost kingdom.
Oh, wow. Powerful poem. That was Junkyard. Thanks so much for sharing that, Barry.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was Barry Casey with Junkyard. Hope you can share another poem sometime soon.
I will.
Okay, next up, let's go to Phil Stern. Phil hasn't been here in a while. Hey, Phil, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. Is your camera's not on? I don't think. If you'd like it to be.
What should I do?
Well, you can turn your camera on if you'd like to be on video, but if not, that's fine too.
Okay. Am I on now?
Still not. Maybe it's like got a cover on it or something. I just see black.
No, it doesn't have a cover.
All
right, let's do it without it.
Okay. Well. Anyway, Phil, it was great to see you today because I met your son in New York City too, Nathaniel Stern.
No, he told me.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I loved him. He's so authentic and creative at the same time, which is a rare combination. I really liked him a lot. He read a poem at a very strange art gallery event with hosted by Food Mask U, who is a sort of a performance artist that has been all over like Newsweek and stuff for putting his meal on his face and then eating it. And so we had some of that, but we had a little poetry segment there, and Nathaniel read one of his poems too. But he's been doing some great stuff in NFT poetry.
Yeah, Yeah, he's all over the place. He's so energetic. He gets so much stuff, But he told me he enjoyed meeting you and listening to you and Katie read.
Yeah, well, it was cool to meet him. So what do you have yourself to share today, though?
Yeah. Do you have the poem in front of you there?
I do, from New Verse Used, Myth Information.
Yeah. This discussion today about obsessions, I was myself wondering, why the last couple of years I've been obsessed with using wordplay in a lot of my poems, and kind of a double vision, I guess. But I don't know. Maybe it's a way of confronting all the stuff that's going around. And this is one of the poems. Have others that are a little more, heavy, but this one is kind of light. Anyway, the background, of course, is that this week President Biden signed legislation ending the so-called emergency for COVID-19.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Okay, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. Anyway, the poem's called Myth Information. Now the emergency is over. Caution and funding are over. But yesterday, one of our leaders went mything. He said it was a hoax, then said it would not blast, then sold equine and oquin and proposed bleach to the fringe bleacher seats at his tent show. He watched as the wild virus burned, ungoverned, saw it sprinkle hot ashes on refrigerated COVID wagons circling hospitals where breathless bodies stiffened. Yet missed messages still burn about dangers of masking and vaccines that damage DNA still cause national disfusion. So do we now forget that we allowed over 1 million deaths to happen?
Yeah, great poem. Thanks for sharing that, Phil. And that's, of course, at New Verse News. I always love seeing your bio, too. Philip Stern is 95, had a poem published in The Atlantic in 1957, wrote pop songs in the 60s, and started writing poetry again after retiring from college. That's just great. I always love it when you can join us, Phil. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much. And I enjoy attending when I can.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Okay.
Yeah, that was Phil Stern with Myth Information from New Verse News, which is, of course, a great place to send your Poets Respond poems. Send them to Rattle first, but then send them to there, because they publish a lot more poems than we do. They do, I think they do a poem every day, if I remember right. But you can find that at newversenews.blogspot.com. So, okay. Well, let's go next to, let's go to Carla Schwartz next. And hopefully I didn't screw up Zoom, because I was trying to make Phil show up, and I think let's see. Carla, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can, but let me see. Let's see. There you go. I have to manually switch everybody so they show up on screen now. Okay. Anyway, there you are. Hello, Carla. How you doing?
Hi. I'm good. I'm very good. I've been swimming in ponds and I loved the interview today. And I actually was traveling, so I would have missed Monday night, and I'm so happy.
No, I'm glad that worked out for you.
Yeah.
So what do you have that you'd like to share?
I did a prompt poem, and the picture is at the end of the poem, so you can show that first if you want.
Yep, I've got that up for you. So we're looking at, for those at home, we're looking at, I think, cross-country skiing, I assume. So there's a woods,
yes,
and there's some patches of snow that some people have recently skied through. Right.
And it's a trail that I make on my property and try to maintain.
Ah, great.
When there's snow.
Yeah.
So this is called To My Ski Trail. You were my last, you were my final, my friend, my home, ensconced in pines, overshadowed by pines, imbued with pines. I'd pass through you, inhale the scent of pine. But as the days crept into March, As the days marched on, as the sun rose higher above the pines with each passing day, as I'd pass over and through with each loop on skis, as I'd take such joy of you, I whittled you down just a little more, especially around that shushing place where I'd ski the hill, glide into you. Now you lie there barely clothed, seductive, your narrow grooves slicked with wet, while the bare ground encroaches, threatens to steal your breath. Knowing your days are numbered, you jostle for final pleasures, a singeing heat, a kiss, a melting under sun.
Yeah, that's great. And then once again, there's that photograph of the ski tracks through Carla's property. That's wonderful, Carla. Thanks so much for sharing that. Carla Schwartz with To My Ski Trail. Yeah, thanks. Always a pleasure, Carla.
Yep. Tim, are you actually projecting images on the screen? Because I'm not seeing anything.
Oh, this is for, I should say, for everybody who's new, you can keep watching on the stream. So so go back to YouTube or Facebook, wherever you're watching, and you can see the poems where they were. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, so just pop over on Zoom, how it works, to share your poem, and then you can go back to where you were watching before, and then get the full experience. So next up is Nate Jacob.
Hey, good day to you.
Hey, how you doing, Nate?
I'm all right. The sun is shining through my windows. So.
It looks like a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day here too. Finally, winter's over in the mountains here.
Well, it snowed here yesterday. So.
Oh, did it? Well, I don't want to hear that word.
I don't either. I'm done. Hey, I sent you an acrostic type poem. Photograph of pancakes that I made last.
I got the pancakes right. Those are good looking pancakes. You are a pancake artisan. That's
my first batch even, and they turned out. So.
Oh, that's great.
Hey, good. And then lately I've been writing poetry pre-mourning, MOURN. My son, who's graduating from high school this year.
Well, congratulations to him. But yeah, that must be. I haven't experienced that yet, but I can imagine what it's going to be like. You know, my daughter's, getting so close to the driver's license age, and it's just like, whoa, what?
So I've been writing off and on about, putting myself into that time already. So the poem is called "We Could Talk Over Pancakes." Enough about dream and misty memory. Enough about cobwebs of the mind. Enough, my God, with the meaning of it all. I slept hard into the creases of my pillow, left lines across my sweaty forehead, which you noticed, mentioned an hour later. And I did dream. I do remember it all. And I want to tell you about the details, about how I awoke not knowing where I was. But I have no stomach this morning for mining my dreams for meanings, which were never really intended for me. I was shirtless, lost again in my college dorm, searching for a slip of paper, my class list, or my room number. I don't remember dreams. My tooth was loose, and the bird was loud in the tree out the window, where my bike had once been tied with a schoolboy knot. All of those things are meaningless, less and less each time I dream them. So much more often of late since Jack moved away. And I wake up sweating or crying aloud for him to eat his oatmeal. He hates it, hates oatmeal, hates my insistence that a proper breakfast is perfect oatmeal. He's gone now, barely able to afford cereal, eating it dry the way his mother does, with a spoon still, in a bowl still, properly like a well-raised child does things. God, I wish he'd come home for breakfast. I wish he'd tell me his dreams and fears. And together we could make some sense of every damn thing that makes no sense. Maybe that could be just dream enough. Maybe in the end, everything I dream now is just me making just enough sense of him.
Yeah, beautiful poem as always, Nate. And yeah, that feeling is something that is kind of new to me. It's hitting me. Like, as I coach Little League, and we went to medieval times on Easter, which is our Easter tradition. So I took the kids there, and my daughter was the queen, the princess. They named, like, they crowned, the winner crowned someone, and so she was crowned when she was like 3 or 5 and 6, like 2 years in a row. They picked her as the princess, And so this time she's 12 now. And as I was watching like a new little girl be crowned a princess, I was just like, tears, really like she's, never going to be the princess of the medieval times again. And just the way that, life moves so fast. It seems so recently that, they're so little and then all of a sudden they're not,
It's sneaky.
It really is. They sneak up.
Good luck with it.
Yeah, well, thanks. You too, Nate. Good luck. And we'll be writing poems about it together, I'm sure. Thanks.
Amen.
Yeah, take care. Yeah, it was Nate Jacob with We Could Talk Over Pancakes. I love that poem. Thanks, Nate. Next up, let's go to Dick Westheimer.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Dick. How you doing today?
Good. Zoom just made my whole Zoom disappear for a moment. I had to go and pull it back.
I've had a lot of weird technical issues. I don't know what, maybe the Mercury's in retrograde or something. I don't know, but there's we're still not on. I can't figure out what's going on with Twitter. But and then I had some YouTube or Zoom problems. Whatever.
Yeah, I don't think Twitter can figure out what's going on with Twitter. So you're not alone.
I have to confess, I think that you and other people were right about it. I mean, it's ruined. So it's too bad 'cause I only started using Twitter like a little while ago, and it's just fallen apart.
It's a shame. I mean, I found some workarounds to follow poets who I'm following and to avoid the crazy violent videos that they try to feed me and stuff.
Yeah, that's weird. I haven't seen any of that, but I guess I don't really browse much. So the one thing I do like is the articles. It shows articles that your friends of your friends have shared or whatever. I love that feature, and so that's the only thing I use really on Twitter.
Well, I'll have to look for that. I just loved your interview with. I shouldn't call it an interview because I think one of the things that I've identified that you do is getting conversation with whomever you're. It feels like a very mature sophomore in college conversation in a dorm room that you're having with these poets.
Well, that's perfect. Yeah, that's the goal. We've even in Rattle, even the old issues, we always called them conversations instead of interviews because we want to have a feel exactly like that. I think it's a great way to put it, of maybe slightly stoned sometimes. It's a good way to do it too.
No, it really feels like a conversation where each of you is, I felt this way when I was in conversation with you, that it was just, each of us enjoying the conversation.
Yeah.
So
that's
it really
great.
felt like that with Julia. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks for saying that. So what is it that you want to share this week?
First of all, the poems on open mic have been terrific.
They have, yeah.
Over
I mean, it gets better
typing
every week. I think that's one of the things, about having the show go on and just people get better and better, and the poems get better and better.
Yeah, I hope the newcomers come back.
Yeah, me too.
Terrific. So I'll read the Thomas Merton poem.
Sure.
Thomas Merton walks the Louisville streets after the last mass shooting, recent mass shooting, whatever it's called. You'll see that I crossed off the title right before I sent it in because it was no longer the last mass shooting.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that's something that has to happen unless the poem is like an hour old. It has to be crossed off.
Right. Yeah, yep. And even so. So just by way of background, if folks don't know Merton, he was a Trappist monk, pacifist, and mostly writing in the 50s and 60s, but a really interesting poet, essayist. And on the corner of 4th and Walnut in Louisville, there's a plaque where he had his great revelation, which I'll read here as part of the epigraph.
Okay.
So epigraph: in Louisville at the corner of 4th and Walnut, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I theirs, and I had no way of telling them that they were all walking around shining like the sun.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and then from Yeats, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. Thomas Merton walks the Louisville streets after a recent mass shooting. Merton heads north on 4th, filches a butt from a sand-filled ashtray, flicks it lit with a near-spent Bic, drags it down to the filter. This is homeless Merton, wandering Merton, not the late Trappist monk Merton, but back from the dead, living now as every vagrant on every street corner in Louisville Merton, including 4th and Walnut, where every day he's telling people that they are all walking around, shining like the sun. He turns right on Main, feels a calling to, a shouting from, and sees he's among men in tears in heaps on the ground, women comforting them, police in their armored blues, microphones, TV crews, shattered glass, the mayor. And then there's the blood, all that blood. Merton stares at the scene, whispers so everyone can hear, says, I am a minor god in this new church where ARs tear flesh and shatter bones. My rituals of innocence are drowned by this carnage. He walks under the highway to the riverbank, says his absolutions, testifies to the flowing Ohio with his tears, finds on the ground a picture, tips it on its side to see the hidden image of those now dead brought back to life. But no, nothing can raise the dead, can unshatter bones, can make the good God Merton believe. And he is the kind of God who exists when his faith is strong, when he believes in us. He hears the sound of dust settling around him. It resounds like gravel through an hourglass. He plugs his ears with his nicotine-stained fingers, but soon realizes he is the dust he hears. He is settling into a fine layer of nothing. He will be washed away by the river rising, by his own tears.
Yeah, another great poem, as always, Dick. That was Thomas Merton walks the Louisville streets after the last mass shooting. Love that ending, and that quote, too, which I'm not familiar with. I had never seen it before, but that had no way of telling people that they're all walking around shining like the sun. That's just such a beautiful, way to think about the world. And it sounds like a wonderful person. I don't really know much about Thomas Merton, but I'm going to have to look more of that up.
Yeah, check him out. And there is a plaque right at the corner of 4th and Walnut in Louisville, sort of like it's a pilgrimage place for some of us. So
well, definitely. Well, definitely have to learn more about him. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Sure. Thanks, Tim.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, it was Dick Westheimer once again. Let's see. And now I think the last person we have who hasn't gone yet is Nivedita. And I'm not sure. I'm trying to think if this is late at night now. Hey, Nivi, how you doing today?
Hey, Tim, I'm doing great. Thank you. How about you?
Good. And so what time is it there in India? It must be late, right? Late at night?
Yeah, it's getting to a quarter before midnight.
I should have called on you first. I didn't think of that until just
no,
now.
that's fine. But actually, this time's better for me, so it's okay.
Okay. Well, it's great to see you again.
I really don't mind waiting. I mean, I got a chance to listen actually to an entire show live after a really long time, so I was really, really happy with it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you could. And so what do you have to share with us this week?
I have a prompt poem, and I sort of went back to my old ways of writing light verse because this time that just seemed the most appropriate to me. Basically, my phone, I mean, if anybody takes my phone, all they're going to see if they open the gallery is pictures of like flowers and trees and plants, and basically that's it. But the sad part is that I like admiring them. I just can't seem to grow any plants myself.
I can relate. Like, I think that the one thing is the hydrangea right there is a happy plant, but everything else is dead or in the process of dying. So I can relate to that. But these are beautiful flowers. I'll show the picture on screen for everybody at home.
So my poem is basically also at work this month, every week. We're sort of holding like poetry contests, and I think the prompt, I think it was last week, was to write sort of a humorous poem about what you would do if you were a serial killer. And I thought that prompt and this poem sort of fit this picture very well, saying as how I can't seem to keep any plants alive. And well, what does that make me if not a serial killer? So that's basically what this poem is about.
Well, you and me both. Let's hear it.
Serial killer. Oh, I'm definitely a serial killer. But my dead bodies aren't buried under pillars. Instead, I kill way more plants than those pesky wasps and ants, and even those giant monarch caterpillars. That's it. I'm taking a break and putting away my shears and my rake. I'll just save myself the trouble and head on to the store on the double to stock up on potted plants that are fake.
That's so great. And yeah, it's perfect. And see, even this is the best I've done. And you can see that well, where is it? The death is approaching. I'm trying my hardest. I've moved this like, does it need more sun? Does it need less sun? Does it need more water? Does it need less water? Looked it up on the internet. I don't know. So there's that. But anyway, thanks so much for sharing
I just get my fill of plants and trees by going down to the garden that's there in our apartment complex. And I'm like, oh, flowers, oh, trees, oh, leaves, oh, so pretty, oh, green. Okay, bye. I'll just admire you from here. I'm not going to be responsible for killing any more of nature than we humans already are. So I leave that to, just that's not me.
Yeah,
you look beautiful there. Just stay there.
Yeah, well, good thing nature knows what it's doing, or we'd all be in trouble.
I know.
Excellent. Well, very fun as always. Thanks for sharing. I'm glad you could be here live, Nivi. It's great.
Thank you, Tim. It was lovely being here.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Have a great day. Thank you.
That was Nivi DeKarthik, of course, with Serial Killer, which we all unfortunately are. And I forgot, sorry, Susan Talley is also here. Sorry, Susan, I left you out of you disappeared on my little window, and now you came back. Hello.
I have a problem that can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, you're here online now. It's working. Yep. But
I'm also like the Skype used to do. I hear the two audios at the same time. So
you must have your window, because there's the original stream and then we have guests on through the Zoom. So you must have that open still. So just shut that off and then you'll only hear me. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you can either mute or X out of that.
Honestly, I don't think I could do that. I've tried and I can't do that. Well, do you hear reverb?
No, I hear it's fine for me. So
okay.
Yeah. So
well, if you want to just put up a poem and I'll read it.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and read it. Yeah.
I sent in a picture too.
Yeah, we're ready. So go ahead. I have the picture here, which is a leaf on the window, and then there's sort of a brick building across the way. So that's the picture, and here's the poem. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
I'm going to ask you to read it now because all I see is 4 pictures of 4 people. I just haven't. I'm going to ask for help for this, but I look forward to hearing you read it if you don't mind.
Okay, no problem at all, Susan. So yeah, I'll just read it myself. Okay. So here we go. This is okay. So this is dalliance, which is a word I don't know actually. Dalliance. I'll have to look that up after I read it. But dalliance. Like a house guest, my visitor stuck to the window, confident in its singular nature, and curious, elliptical beauty, the glass canvas gave my subject transparent charm, unlike the opaque African violets on the sill. My watercolors would need less blue as any leaf rendered after rain. I thought about sunlight, the wash of summer blends, the way this leaf dipped off the color chart into the translucent glow of a yellow-green newborn baby frog. But newly vulnerable, the leaf already was curling, preparing me for its leaving. Oh, that's wonderful. And then I look back at the photo for those who can watch, and it's just beautifully described there in the poem. And it is that translucent color. It's really wonderful. I love that, the comparison to frogs there. Thanks so much for sharing that, Susan. And sorry the technical difficulties are an issue, but we see and hear you fine. So whatever it is, we'll have to figure out. But thanks for joining. And that was Susan Talley, once again, with dalliance. And I want to look up dalliance because that is a word I don't know. So let's see what that means. Dalliance. I always love learning a new word. And I can force you to learn it with me. A casual, romantic, or sexual relationship, dalliance. A brief or casual involvement with something. Such as Berkeley was my last dalliance with the education system. Very interesting. So I learned a new word. I love that. Let's see. So we do have a little bit of extra time to see maybe some people who sent poems in. I could do my other poem too. Yeah. Okay, so I'll do my other poem too, and then we'll do other poems that were emailed in. So I did, like I said, I wrote a bunch of poems on a plane, which was fun. And I'm not going to show the picture for this because it's a picture of my daughter. I haven't asked her if I could share it, but you can imagine the picture of her from my phone of her cradling a stink bug. And the extra prompt that I got for this one was from Joe Barca, who I thought might be here today. He usually he participates in the Critique of the Week during the day, but it's too late for him on the Rattlecast nights, I've heard. But he asked me to write a poem with a insect in the title. And so the title was originally Stink Bug, and I changed it since to Thanatosis, which I think is a slightly better title for this poem, but it was inspired by that and the photo of my daughter holding one of these big creatures. And here's the poem. Oops, where we go? There we go. Nope, that's not it. Here's this poem. So this is Thanatosis. And it's a hyben, so be ready for that. Thanatosis. My daughter won't share a room with a spider, but cups the giant stink beetle in her own 2 hands. Shows me how the shell is strong, how it's light as the air around it. Bigger than her thumb, she loves how they move with a slow grace. It's only playing dead, she tells me, setting it down on the side of the footpath as if it were a game. Morning dew, every blade bows to you. That is my hyben, also based on the prompt this week. So a couple of weeks I've missed a couple, so now I'm sort of caught up with 2 poems this week. Thanatosis is that feigning dead behavior that insects exhibit. A lot of their predators are animals that track movement, like birds, and so if they play dead, they become invisible. So insects have developed certain insects, including the California stink beetle, I should say, develop this as a technique to avoid being eaten. If they notice a bird looking at them, they'll play dead. And, they really look dead. They don't move at all. And then the bird can't see them and then flies away, and then they start walking again. So that is Thanatosis. Okay, let's see what else we have, because there's a little extra time. Here is this is Potter O'Donoghue. He says he'd like to hear me read it. So, of course, and here's his photo describing, for those at home, this is interesting. This is a sort of an abandoned kind of area, and we have 2 shopping carts here, sort of facing off in a sort of patchy grass field, as if they're maybe gonna like 2 bulls about to charge each other or something. So it's 2 shopping carts in a field, and let's see this poem. This is Potter O'Donoghue. Is there a title? I think it's untitled. Maybe it's I Don't Know What Happened is the title. Here we go. I don't know what happened, but it might have been the sort of thing that happens on an overcrowded train or overcrowded bus. Or she asked me if I was okay. How should I know? Said maybe I should go to the hospital, but I'd never heard of a pub called the hospital. Besides, I didn't seem to have any money. Do you need some money? Oh, I'd love some money. How much do you need? About 50,000 euro would be nice. I meant money to get home. Precisely. Are you sure you don't need the hospital? Oh, I'd love to go to the hospital, but I don't know where it is. We could walk there. I could walk you there. Thank you. I think I remember the train was late, or I was late for the train. I think something that might conceivably happen, but usually doesn't happen, on the late train, or the train I was late for, a crowded train, no doubt. Or was it a bus? We were at the hospital now, but it didn't look much like a pub, or how I remember a pub to be. Maybe the rain, maybe the train was a pub. I can't get a drink here, I said. I know she would have replied, either of us, if either of us had been there. Yeah, a really interesting poem. And again, there's a great photo, too, by Potter O'Donoghue. Thanks so much for sharing that, Potter. Let's see what else we have. I think Clayton Clark sent one in. She says, there's too much noise outside my house, so I hope we can read it if there's time. Thanks so much for the interview with Julia. Here is a photo, and this is another interesting photo from her camera roll. It is here. Oops. Let's see. There it is. So this is a photo of somebody like in a Jason mask and in front of a piano. So it's like a Halloween maybe thing. And Jason is that like hockey mask, but it looks kind of menacing. And there's another person next to him, and there's a red and white striped candle. That's how I can describe it. And so let's hear this poem by by Clayton Clark. It kind of looks like an egg. So here we go. It kind of looks like an egg, face masked with zipper and pockmarks, loved by those who play hockey. If anyone's in the mood to go hunting for treats left by a rabbit, it's not bad camouflage, minus the physique that sports it on this day of Christ's rising. Having risen, I'm not surprised or frightened by this incarnation, since this version is only our son who's come to visit, even help prepare the celebrant meal, with his human brother and others here, grateful, hungry, and contemplative. By candlelight we sit down to potatoes, ham, and green beans, toast to the miracle of love, unaware of what's to come. Very interesting. Yeah, that's a very interesting turn in that poem there. I love the ending. And again, once again, one look at that picture. That was Clayton Clark with it kind of looks like an egg. Okay. Let me see if we have any others to share. And here's one by Lucy Chow. We'll close out with that, and then we'll do that'd be perfect. We'll close out with Lucy Chow's. She probably can't be here. She's in China, of course, and so it's really the middle of the night there, I think. It'll be midnight here when the show is live. Yeah, it's about 3 a.m. at this point. So this is Lucy Chow's poem, To an Artist of an Ardent Alchemy. Oh, and she included audio too, so maybe I can grab that audio. Let me download it really quickly. Just hang on one second. Okay, so this is a pretty good size. Lucy's always a great poet with longer poems. So here's the picture. I'll put this up first, and then we can listen along with Lucy. And this will close out the show. We'll do the Sciku, of course, and everything else later too. But here we go. This is the photo that she used. This is a painting, and did she say whose it was? Let's see. I don't consider it a prompt poem. And the poem was inspired by Leon de Venice's dazzling canvas winter landscape painting. So you can Google winter landscape painting and maybe find it. I don't consider it a prompt poem in the strict sense, though the prompt did turn me to my camera roll, which is rife with saved images of works by artists I admire, rather than photos I've taken myself. This one has a quite straightforward, even mundane title, but the work itself is teeming with an enthusiasm that I have seen in poems of G.M. Hopkins. I have attached an image of the painting. See if you can show it on screen. Yeah, and this is a beautiful painting for those. If you're only listening, you should check it out. The light in this, we'll put it on screen here. The light is just wonderful in this painting. And here is Lucy reading her poem.
Hello, everybody. This is Lucy Chow reading her poem inspired by painting by Leon de Venice. The painting is called Winter Landscape Painting, and there are a few words I would like to explicate. There is a German term for the spring blooming flower forget-me-not called Vergissmeinnichts, and there are a few quotes from Gerard Manley Hopkins in the poem. To an Artist of Ardent Alchemy, for Leon de Venice. And other light vibrates in you than visible to my eyes. Myriad lights, the skyline's virgin zeal of white, daubs of primrose, blushing, bleeding into pink bloom, gold vermilion pennants gashing, flashing against placid, pallid slices of blue eyes, more like a prism spinning wide span shine into the finest, brightest twine of light that cuts the hand holding its flame, than a homely hearth, blue bleak embers falling and galling themselves into glory. Then higher up, duskier, muskier mellowness, waxing darker, deeper, more delicious, milky purple of fresh steamed taro, mashed with a startling magenta stain of pitahaya, dashes of ripe papaya. Towards it leaneth a delft blue plate in penumbra, holds all the abelian cornucopia in consummate calmness. What does your mind see, spreading that splendid welkin, those mazy glows reflected on sculpted slopes of snow, an element against which light has to scrape harder than free air, being grosser, coarser, a cold weight tamping down dead plant relics, but blazoned with its own flora of opalescent crystals? Are you staring into centers of water lilies, putting your ear to flaring clarions of daffodils, straining your neck under a trellised cathedral dome of wisteria, cardinal creeper, hummingbird vine, and bougainvillea? Do you reminisce on an autumn hike up the same mountain, where every rustling step of your trampling boots upset a cluster of gentian's white china goblets and spilled a wreath of lapis flames, scorching the leather with cerulean simulacra? Peering at the blues in your winter landscape painting, I picture you melting with burning brushstrokes, stark abysms of frost, soldering together a fall bloom and pale early spring with its Vergissmeinnichts, smearing, smoothing them into one vision, one reverie, shimmering with coral, cyan, lilac, lemon, auburn, an organic kaleidoscope at that orgiastic moment. Yours is not a mind of winter, or rather, not winter alone. Thou art lightning and love, I found it, a winter and warm. You are painting in the voice of Hawkins, who might well be speaking from bodies of those sunsets swathed, alpenglow gowned, starry sharded conifers suddenly tropical with holographic butterflies and hummingbirds ghosting as needles, when he cried, "Glory be to God for dappled things." And Leon, because you make it so, winter is warm, soft with sun, acicular scintillas selving as leaves. O Christ, as miraculous light, come to these trees, undraped by tinsel, baptized with your pied beauty.
Yeah, beautiful poem by Lucy as always, and I love that that you are painting in the voice of Hopkins. What a great line there! Again, here is the painting that Lucy was referencing in her poem, and the poem once again was to an artist of ardent alchemy. Some alliteration there, and then based on Devonichi's dazzling canvas winter landscape painting. So do check that out. Very interesting moment, as always. So many references and such vividness in that painting, as always, by Lucy Chow. Thanks for sharing that, Lucy. Let's see. I wonder if there's anybody else I should share really quickly. So here's a quick poem too. We haven't had Steve Horrell on. Well, there's a quick, it's a response to a late story. Gunmen shot and killed 17 wild horses west of Kamloops, British Columbia. This happened on March 17th. He says, I'm a bit late. Couldn't get past the fuck you asshole anger. I'm sure the woman who this poem is addressed to is angry as hell. A few decades ago, we went into the interior of BC so she could see, feel, and watch the wild horses. So here's Postcard to Bonnie, a short poem from Steve Horrell, who we'll close out with this and then do the Sciku. Here we go. Postcard to Bonnie. We went up into the dry hills near Walhatchin, saw the wild horses, their hooves roaring through the valley. How you moved among them, the stallion came out to you, tentative, suspicious, but close, very close, his eyes dark gems. I never saw you through his eyes. Perhaps I wouldn't have known then you meant no harm. Postcard to Bonnie. Very interesting little poem by Steve Harrell. Thanks for sharing that, Steve. That is going to wrap up the open lines for today. The Sciku for this week. Let me pull that up. The Sciku for this week is here. This is based on research from the University of Michigan, which I will put on screen. I'm always interested in evolution. It's one of the topics that I find fascinating. And this science article is based on the University of Michigan. If I can fit it here. Apes may have evolved upright stature for leaves, not fruit, in open woodland habitats. So for the longest time, the theory has been that apes started walking on two legs so they could reach up to get fruit as they moved around the forest more easily. It turns out through a series of anthropological studies looking back at what the world was like where they were 10 million years ago, that they were actually these woody grasslands. And so it was more... and then they also found that their teeth were made for chewing leaves and not fruit at the time. And so our ancestors actually developed bipedal walking to move through the grassy places from sort of copse of tree to copse of tree while eating leaves, and not, as we thought, to eat fruit in a lush forest. So overturning some theories on animal evolution. And so the Sciku, it's sort of a far leap, but maybe you can see... how it got there, but this was my haiku that it inspired. Break in the rain, the cardinal on a branch deciding. Break in the rain, the cardinal on a branch deciding. That is the Sciku for this week, and that is the show for this week. A really wonderful one with Julia Dasbach. And just wonderful open lines, too. Thanks, everybody, for joining on the unusual time. Next week's guest in the Rattlecast is going to be back at the regular time. And we're going to have Tresha Faye Hefner. Tresha has been, she's been around a few times, but she's also the host of the Poetry Salon and the founder of that, which does just wonderful work on teaching poetry. She's sort of an expert in teaching poetry. She has a book, Method and Mystery, a research-based guide to teaching poetry. So we'll talk about that a lot. She also has a new book out, which we'll share poems from as well. But I'm really looking forward to this. Trisha is just a brilliant poet who knows a lot about poetry. She's been doing the Poetry Salon for, I think, 15 years or so. That's next week's guest, Tresha Faye Hefner. Oh, and I forgot to say the prompt. I'm sorry. The prompt for next week, based on Julia's book, is here. Choose an object and use it as a metaphor for the body. Write a poem using Julia's style with colons. So Julia's book, if you remember, it was using that metaphor of, the baby is the size of a plum today. The baby is the size of a cantaloupe now. That kind of thing. So use a metaphor like that for the body. It doesn't have to be fruit. It can be fruit, but it can be something. But find something, use it as a metaphor for the body, but then write the poem in that style using colons as simile kind of markers and move your way through the poem as if you're moving through similes. And that is going to be the prompt for next week. A little more complicated than usual, but we've seen many examples in Julia's work, so hopefully we can do that. That's going to be the prompt for next week. And then, like I said, once again, next week's guest is going to be Tresha Faye Hefner, talking about Method and Mystery, her newest book as well. It'll be a lot of fun. That's the regular time, Monday, April 24th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you then. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and I will talk to you later. Good day.